Hello and welcome to Prairie Pulse. Do you remember the movie Catch Me If You Can, starring Leonardo DiCaprio portraying a young con man? Well, Doug Hamilton and I had a chance to attend an event where the guest speaker was that real-life con man, Frank Abagnale Jr. And Doug had a chance to sit down and talk with him.
Frank Abagnale, thanks for joining us on Prairie Pulse. A pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
And before we get into our discussion, I just want to read a bit from a brief bio of you to sort of set the scene here, because your life is very interesting. Frank W. Abagnale is one of the world's most respected authorities on forgery, embezzlement, and secure documents. For over 40 years, he has worked with, advised, and consulted with hundreds of financial institutions, corporations, and government agencies around the world. Mr. Abagnale's rare blend of knowledge and expertise began more than 45 years ago when he was known as one of the world's most famous confidence men. Any holes we should fill in that brief bio?
People I know are fascinated by what I did between 16 and 21. I'm 70, and so when I look back on my life, I'm fascinated by the fact that I did it. Served my time in prison. I've worked for the FBI for 4 decades and have spent my entire life dealing with fighting crime and educating people about dealing with all types of crimes. And been married to my one and only wife for 40 plus years, and 3 sons, 5 grandchildren, a son who's an FBI agent. Kind of an amazing other side of my life than the side people know from the movie.
Well, those 5 years from 16 to 21 were filled with some very interesting adventures. You impersonated an airline pilot, a physician, an attorney, and a federal prisons agent. So let's talk about the pilot one just to set the scene for how you did this kind of thing.
Well, people always say that they thought I was brilliant when in fact I was just an adolescent, so I had no fear of being caught. I never premeditated anything. I had ran away from home at 16. Back in the 60s, a lot of kids ran away from home, but they got caught up in Haight-Ashbury, the hippie scene, the drug scene. I ended up on the streets of New York and didn't have any money. I kind of quickly realized that as long as people believed I was 16, I wasn't going to get anywhere. So the first thing I did was alter my driver's license. Back then they didn't have a photo on it. It was just an IBM card, so I altered 1 digit of my date of birth. I was actually born in April of 1948. I dropped the 4, converted it to a 3. So that made me 26 years old. And I started writing checks. I had an account. When the money ran out, I kept writing the checks to support myself. And I one day was walking down the street and I saw an airline crew come out of a hotel, and I thought to myself, if I could get that uniform, then when I walked in a bank, it would give so much more credibility to asking to cash a check. And that was the sole purpose of it, nothing more than that. So I was able to finagle getting a uniform. Once I got the uniform, I realized that you could actually board planes and ride on planes for free in the jump seat. So I did that, and I was able to stay in hotels and bill the airline from my room. So by the 2 years from 16 to 18, I flew in more than 260 aircraft in more than 62 countries around the world, just riding the jump seat and posing as the pilot. But it started out as more of a front for the checks, and then every time I moved along, something else would come up, and I was somewhat of an opportunist, so I saw it as an opportunity and I took that to the next step.
Was there a thrill in it for you?
And not so much a thrill as more of a survival and running from the law and how to avoid the law. I could travel around the world without a passport, on an airline crew card. There were a lot of reasons I did it, other than just, I don't think there was ever really a thrill. It was more about just staying one step ahead of the law and staying one step of trying to survive.
Were you ever in the cockpit?
Many, many times. Most of the time in the cockpit, but in the jump seat. I was smart enough never to ride on Pan Am, which is the pilot I was posing as, because I was always afraid someone would start asking me questions about who I knew and where I was based. And so I always rode on other carriers, and then I also knew they would never ask me to do any function in the cockpit since I was a pilot riding the jump seat on another carrier. So I always put those things in place so that I didn't get myself in a situation I couldn't get out of.
Well, you impersonated a physician as well, so how did you protect other people from yourself?
Again, the same thing. I moved to Atlanta, and I moved into an apartment complex. On the application it asked profession, so I didn't want to put airline pilot because the police were looking for me, so I put down doctor and left it at that. had a very inquisitive apartment manager. She asked me what kind of doctor I was. So I said pediatrician because it was a singles complex. There were no children there. And then the next thing you know, I met a pediatrician who lived there, got to know him. He took me up to the hospital to meet people. And then one day he asked me if I would mind covering a shift at the hospital for 2 weeks while a doctor had gone home because of a death, and that it was an administrative position, didn't have to treat anybody. And so again, I saw it more as a challenge to see if I could get away with doing it. So I went to the hospital and worked in the hospital. And in the hospital and the lawyer, no one really ever doubted I was not that person. It was I who left on my own.
Nobody said, here's an emergency, it's time for you to step in?
No, because it was mainly an administrative position, so I kind of just administrated the staff on my shift, so it wasn't a very difficult thing to do.
Well, you were ultimately apprehended at a pretty tender age, 21,
Yes.
in Europe.
I was arrested by the French police when I was 21 years old, actually on an Interpol warrant from the Swedish police. So were looking for me for forgery in Sweden, but they believed I was living in France. But when the French authorities took me into custody on the Swedish warrant, they realized I'd forged checks all over France, so they refused to honor the warrant and their request for my extradition. They later convicted me of forgery and sent me to French prison. I eventually served my time in France, was extradited to Sweden, where I served time in a Swedish penitentiary in Malmö, Sweden. When my sentence was up, U.S. federal authorities took custody of me, returned me to the United States, and eventually a United States federal judge in Atlanta, Georgia, sentenced me to 12 years in federal prison. I served about 4 years of those 12 years at a federal prison in Petersburg, Virginia. When I was 26 years old, the government offered to take me out of prison on the condition I go to work with an agency of the federal government for the remainder of my sentence or until my parole had been completed. I agreed, and I've spent the last 4 decades at the FBI.
So you're put in prison at the age of 21, and ultimately you come out of prison helping the FBI and the federal government. How did that happen?
2 reasons. At the time, this was right after Hoover. Clarence Kelly was the director of the Bureau. I think, one, to teach agents at the academy, where I've taught for 4 decades now, to go out in the field and teach agents how to think out of the box, how to look at things not just as black and white, how to deal with social engineering so that they can use it in a legal way to gather information. And also, in the first part of my career, I did a lot of undercover work, mainly because the Bureau could say to me, I need you to be this particular person, a lieutenant in the Army. Your expertise is this particular missile. I need you to know enough about it to go onto this base and find out what's going on about whatever might be the event. So I think a lot of it was all of those things combined. I don't think they ever dreamed, or I ever dreamed, I would stay there more than the allotted time of my parole. But when my parole was up and the court order was over, they asked me to stay, and I stayed and have been there ever since.
In the course of your doing time in prison and subsequently working with the federal government and various security issues, have you ever, over the course of your life, had the occasion to sort of look inwardly and ask yourself, why did I do this?
I think it was just more about, being a runaway and then thinking about how to survive and those kind of things. I think it was more about that. There was no real motivation to want to be a pilot, be a doctor, or be a lawyer. All of those things I fell into. The lawyer, I met a girl whose father was the Attorney General in Louisiana, and I ended up telling her I had a law degree. As I went to Louisiana, I actually took the bar, I passed the bar, so I practiced law there for a while. I think it was all a matter of just going on, knowing that sooner or later I would get caught. I always knew I'd get caught. It was just a matter of time. But it was just a matter of how long I could stretch it out and how long I could just keep going along as encountered things. And again, very much an opportunist, very much an adolescent who had no fear of being caught, didn't think of the consequences, didn't premeditate anything. If I was standing out in front of a bank with a check for $500, I didn't have a plan. I didn't say I was going to go in, and if they say this, I'll do this. If they do that, I'll do that. I just simply went in and did it. So everything was kind of ad-libbed, and I think that was very much the adolescent, but I think the adolescent was why I was successful at it. Had I been a little smarter, a little older, I think I would have started to rationalize and say, you'll never get away with that, you can't do that, and I probably wouldn't have done half the things that I did.
Frank Abagnale is an author, a lecturer, and a financial fraud consultant. And your story, we started talking about your life history, those formative 5 years from 60 to 21 that launched a career helping people ultimately. But your story was told in a movie and a Broadway musical, Catch Me If I Can.
Catch Me If You
Catch
Can,
Me
yes.
If You Can. What was that experience like, having your story told in a different way?
You know, I didn't have a lot to do with the movie, but I thought it was great that it was Steven Spielberg who did it. He loved the story because of how the story ended out and how my life turned out. So he held the rights for 20 years. So back when he was making Jaws, he bought the rights. So Barbara Walters asked him in an interview, "Why did you wait 20 years to make this movie?" And he said, "Well, I waited to see what the real Frank Abagnale did with his life before I immortalized him on film." So I think it was, he loved that part of the story and he wanted the world to know it. So I was very fortunate that it was he who made the movie. I thought he did a great job of telling the story. Broadway did a great job of telling the story to music. I was very fortunate Leonardo DiCaprio, who did an amazing job. He took the role when he was 27, 28 years old and portrayed the part of a 16-year-old boy. He did an amazing, he's a great character actor. Had people like Tom Hanks and Christopher Walken. So I had an amazing cast, but I thought they did a great job. So if you're going to have your story told, I was very fortunate it was he who told the world the story.
How has Catch Me If You Can, the movie, affected your life?
I get asked quite often, how did the movie change my life? And the truth is, I do the same thing today that I did years ago. The only difference is I get paid more money to do it, and people want to take their picture with me. I don't know how many thousands of pictures I've taken with people. You know, I had written 5 books. I had been on the lecture series for years and years. No one ever asked to have a photo with me. Now, everywhere I go, in the airport, wherever I am, someone wants to take a picture with me. So I think that has a lot to do with people have cameras and social media. They want to put it up on social media. So I always say to my sons, always remind me, you know, Dad, you tell people you're not on social media, but if you type in Frank Abagnale on Twitter, there are 10,000 people that are Frank Abagnale, and the same way on Facebook. So, yeah.
Is that your message when you're talking to people in law enforcement? Don't get too complicated?
Yeah, you know, my career has changed in the 40 years that I've worked with the Bureau. I started out dealing with counterfeits and forgeries and embezzlement, financial crimes. The last 20 years, my whole career has been about cyber-related crimes and the internet and breaches. And so I've had to change, just as crime has changed, I've had to learn how criminals commit those crimes and then find out how to do the investigative end of that and how to teach agents how to look into those crimes. So my career has changed a lot in the 40 years, just as crime has changed, because it's constantly changing every day. So a good example is I've spent the last 40 years, when I do go outside the government to speak, mainly to banks, financial institutions, corporations. So I think when I was in North Dakota in 2008, I was here for a U.S. bank, and they invited their corporate customers. I came back in 2014 for the Chamber of Commerce because the United States Attorney asked me to come and do a presentation for all the businesses here. But in the last 4 years, I've got involved very much with crimes against the elderly, and so I've been working very closely with AARP, and they take me out about 15 times a year. We've been to about 38 states now to reach thousands of people, and basically seniors mostly, to teach them about how not to be hoodwinked by these scams, sweepstakes scams, internet scams, grandparent scams, all kinds of telephone, robocall scams. So I'm a big believer, and I've always been, in all the books I've written over my career all revolve around education being the most powerful tool to fighting crime. So I think it's simply, if you explain to people how the scam works, when they get that next phone call, they get that next letter, the next email, they know how to deal with that.
If it sounds too good to be true, it probably isn't.
That's right.
You have a company, Abagnale and Associates, and you specialize in financial fraud consultancy. You're in North Dakota visiting Fargo because of the AARP and the Fargo-Moorhead West Fargo Chamber of Commerce. What are the central messages you share with your clients?
Well, 2 things we'll do here tonight, because a lot of our audience will be businesses invited by the Chamber. and regular folks and seniors as well. So it'll be an awareness program. This will be a PowerPoint presentation and where I will talk about identity theft and breaches and protecting your identity and the internet and social media and how to protect your children on social media. So it's pretty much an awareness program so that people walk away with a lot of information about a lot of different things, not only to protect their business, protect their family, protect their children, but also protect their assets. And it'll be entertaining, but very educational, and it'll give them the necessary tools to take back and use. And what I do is I have a website. It's just my name, abagnale.com. Obviously, I sell no products. I provide no services. It is strictly an educational site. So we refer people to that because there's so much information to cover you can't cover in a seminar, whether it's 2 or 3 hours long. So we refer people to pamphlets and booklets that I write constantly and put up there that people can use from everything from check forgery to identity theft to embezzlement to whatever it is that they are concerned about. They can go there and research it and get information.
Well, if there's anything that scares a senior citizen, and I'm on the brink of it too, and that is my assets. How secure are they? All my banking's online. My retirement is online. How vulnerable am I?
Well, you know, any system can be breached. There is no foolproof system. We've obviously had many breaches reported and unreported from very sophisticated technology companies that have been breached. So I wouldn't say it's impossible for someone to breach the bank, but I will say that banks and financial institutions as a whole do a much better job than the federal government, the state government, the county government, the city government does in protecting people's assets and information. You take a bank like City National Bank or Chase in Manhattan, they spend about $500 million a year, every year, on technology to keep criminals out. They're constantly stay one step ahead of the criminals, understand what they're doing, and they have a lot of fall-safe programs in place to protect them. We don't have that. We have an infrastructure today with electrical grid that hasn't been updated in 25 years. There's a lot of weak spots in our government. Our Medicare and Medicaid last year paid out $200 billion in fraudulent claims to criminals who lived in other countries around the world. $200 billion, that's 10% of Medicare and Medicaid's annual budget went to criminals. So the government does a very horrible job of protecting information. So I would say that you're in much better hands. It's not anything foolproof, but you're in much better hands with your bank than you would be with the government.
There are lots of scams that involve senior citizens, and they evolve over time, but maybe you could share with our viewers some of the scams that are current and what they should do.
I use very simple rules. So for example, the most common scams we have right now, one is called the grandparent scam. So the telephone rings, you walk over to the caller ID and it says it's the Fargo Police Department. So you pick it up because you believe it is the Fargo Police Department. One of the simplest things to manipulate is caller ID. Someone says that they're Sergeant so-and-so with the Fargo Police Department. They've arrested your grandson for DWI on Interstate 94. And they describe his car to you. They describe the name of his girlfriend that was riding in the car with him, all the details, and then simply tell you that he asked us not to call his parents. He asked us to call you. He'll have to spend the weekend in jail before he sees the judge unless he posts bail in the next couple of hours. Of course, the grandparent says, oh, how much is the bail? You know, $500, and you can give us a credit card number and we can release him. And it's amazing how many, unfortunately, millions of people fall for that every day. So if you explain that to anyone, whether they're a senior or millennial, and you tell them how the scam works, the next time that call comes and that information comes about your grandson or someone's in custody, they know smart enough to hang up the phone, pick up the phone book, look up the Fargo Police Department in the phone book, call the police department, and ask them if they placed that call. That takes 2 minutes to do that. So I'm a big believer in stop, verify. If you get a phone call from the IRS and you're concerned that it is a real call, the IRS really doesn't call anybody, but if you do get a call from the IRS, then just simply hang up the phone. Again, go to the phone book. Don't call the number back they gave you. Look up the IRS, call the IRS, tell them you received that phone call, and of course they'll tell you that that's a fictitious fraudulent call. So it doesn't take but a minute to stop and verify, and that's what I tell people is the solution to most all of these scams.
Well, a common scam years ago, and it keeps coming around in some variation, is the Nigerian windfall. The email that comes to me saying there's all this money that might come my way with a modest investment.
Yeah, and they've moved along from that. You know, the Nigerians years ago, people used to ask me how they sent out thousands and thousands of letters, who paid the postage for the stamps. And I told them that the stamps were all counterfeit, so they paid nothing. They're fraudulent stamps from Nigeria. The difference today with that scam is you used to send out 10,000 letters and hope that 0.1% would respond. Today, through the internet, you could send out 10 million letters, and again, you only need 0.1% to respond. So it's basically the same scam again. And all these scams, you know, as I tell people, same way in a love scam. Someone might have met someone on the internet. They've been involved for 6 months, talking to them back and forth on the internet. They've spoken to them on the phone. They never met them personally. They tell them they live in the next state over in Minnesota or wherever they might be. And one day, out of the clear blue, they say, well, I'd come and see you, but I have to have an operation. I don't have the money for it. And if I don't have the operation, I might lose my life. Oh, well, how much is the operation? Well, it's $35,000. Well, I'll give you the money. So the minute someone asks you for money or someone asks you for information, Social Security number, date of birth, bank account information, that's when the red flags should go up. So there are obvious red flags in every scam. And if you learn to spot those red flags, that's when you need to end that relationship, end that conversation, and know that there's actually a scam being perpetrated against you.
There's a sort of an emotional involvement here too, though, with some of these scams, and even the ones you talked about yourself, becoming an attorney because your girlfriend there was some sort of a connection there. How good are fraud artists, con men, at sort of reading people and moving along with
They're
them?
very good, and people, you know, I have two incidences. My neighbor next to me, and again, I live in South Carolina. Her mother lives in Iowa. Her husband worked for John Deere for years, and he retired and passed away. She's 70, very intelligent woman. Her daughter came over to me because she said, my mother's been getting a phone call from a guy that says he's an ex-FBI agent and that he would investigate. She had lost some money on some scam in Jamaica, and he would investigate it. And he said he was retired because he had been shot, and she asked me if I could check that out. So I told her right off the top, I said, no FBI agent's been shot. So I said, but give me his name and I'll find it out. So I came back and said to her, there is no FBI agent by that name, or has there ever been an FBI agent by that name, retired or otherwise. So she told her mother, and her mother said, when she confronted the guy said, well, really, I'm not an FBI agent. I'm a private investigator in Maryland, and I just said that. So again, her mother came to me, and her daughter came to me. I said, let me just talk to your mother. So I got her mother on the phone. I said, look, I called the Attorney General's office in Maryland. I know him personally. He said there is nobody licensed in that state by that name. So obviously this guy's just trying to get money out of you. So whatever you do, don't give him any money, okay? Because he's not who he says he is. Then the next thing I know, he said, no, it's not Maryland, it's actually New York. So I checked one more time for her in New York, and I said, I'm not going to check anymore, but don't send this guy any money. He's not who he says he is. Next thing I know, he tells her, I need to come see you to investigate the case, but you have to send me the airfare. She sent $1,200, said he'd meet her like an hour from where she lives in a small town in Iowa, in Des Moines, and he never showed up. So, I have another incident where a friend of mine's father, who was a very intelligent gentleman who owned a huge corporation in Tulsa, Oklahoma, he retired, and he was sending money because he said he wanted a Mercedes-Benz, but you have to pay the tax. And he kept sending money. Every time he'd send the money, then they'd say, send more money. And his son kept telling him, Dad, you've sent more money than a Mercedes costs. First of all, you have enough money to go buy 10 Mercedes. If you want to go buy a Mercedes, go buy one. But you've already sent these people. And he kept sending money. So yes, a lot of people get caught up, and those are the ones that are very frustrating and difficult to deal with, because no matter what you tell them, no matter how much evidence you give them, they're so emotionally involved, they still go on with the scam.
So, what about your own upbringing? You had a father and mother. What were the ethical struggles that you might have had?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I not only a mother and father, but I went to Catholic school most of my life up to high school. I believe that sometimes all of us go make mistakes and we go down the wrong path, but you have to have that rope that's been given to you to pull yourself back to the right path. I think my parents gave me the right tools. I just went down the wrong road, ran away, started to get into a lot of trouble.
Well, what is the next stage in your story? You're a senior citizen now too.
Yes. So I'll probably, as the FBI always asks me, when am I going to retire, because they don't want me to, I always tell them that as long as I can go out and speak and sound of mind and physically capable of getting on airplanes and traveling every day, I'll continue to do this. I'll continue to teach at the Academy. I'll be there on August 1st again. I will do that as long as I'm physically able to and I don't start slurring my words or something like that. Then I'll know it's time to quit. But until that time comes, I'll just continue doing what I'm doing.
Well, that's all we have on Prairie Pulse for this week. And as always, thanks for watching.
Funding provided by the members of Prairie Public.